My name is Paige Mercer. On my 25th birthday, my mother told me the truth. She chose a crowded restaurant to do it. Maggie's Place sits on the corner of Main and Oak, the only real sit-down restaurant in a town of 4,000 people. On Friday nights, the booths are full, the air smells like cornbread and grilled steak, and everyone in town eventually passes through the front door. Lorraine Mercer knew that. That's why she picked it. She wore a red dress she usually saved for church holidays. My father, Glenn, wore a button-down shirt he kept adjusting at the collar like it was too tight. They were dressed for an announcement. I didn't cry when she said it. "We only kept you for the tax benefits," Lorraine said, smiling over her wine glass. 6 words. That's all it took to erase 25 years of carefully rehearsed gratitude. But there was something Lorraine didn't know. I had been preparing for that exact moment for 8 months. And the 3 people sitting quietly at a table near the window weren't strangers. They were my real family. But to understand why that moment mattered, you have to go back 8 months earlier. Back to the night I found the box. Lorraine left a sticky note on my apartment door. "Basement Saturday. Clean everything." She never asked. She assigned. My apartment was the converted garage behind my parents' house. 7 years earlier, they had turned it into a one-room space with thin drywall and a small bathroom. I paid $400 a month to live there. Cheap rent, Lorraine liked to remind me. Cheap rent meant obedience. That Saturday, I spent the morning dragging dusty boxes across the concrete floor of their basement. Christmas decorations, old fishing gear, broken lamps Lorraine insisted she might fix someday. Then I found the box. It was shoved behind the water heater, sealed with yellowing tape. Lorraine's name was written across the top. I should have left it alone. Instead, I opened it. Inside was a manila folder. The first document was an adoption certificate. My adoption certificate. The second was a birth certificate I had never seen before. Baby girl Dunbar. Underneath those documents was a receipt from a tax consultant. One line highlighted in yellow. Adoption tax credit, $5,400. I sat on the basement floor for 40 minutes staring at that number. $5,400. That was apparently the value of my existence. I didn't cry. I called Claire. She was my best friend and the only person in town who had ever questioned my parents' version of reality. "Meet me behind the clinic," I said. "Paige, what's wrong?" "Just come." Claire arrived still wearing her vet clinic scrubs. We sat inside her Civic with the dome light on while she read the birth certificate. "Dunbar," she said quietly. "You ever heard that name?" "No." She looked at me carefully. "Remember the DNA kit I gave you for Christmas?" I did. It was still sealed in plastic in my bathroom drawer. "Use it," she said. That night we mailed the test. 6 weeks for results. 6 weeks to pretend nothing had changed. For those 6 weeks, I watched Lorraine differently. I noticed things that had always been there. The way she reminded neighbors how lucky I was to be adopted. The way she controlled my documents, my birth certificate, my social security card. Every piece of identification stayed locked in her filing cabinet. She said it was for safekeeping. Now I understood something else. Control. The DNA results arrived on a Tuesday. I opened the email during lunch in my car outside the clinic. One result appeared immediately. Helen Dunbar. Match confidence, 99.7%. Relationship, parent. I stared at the photograph attached to the profile. A woman standing in a garden wearing nurse scrubs, 47 years old, married, 1 son, my brother. My hands were shaking when I sent the message. "My name is Paige. I believe you might be my biological mother." Her reply arrived 4 hours later. 1 sentence. I've been waiting for this message for 25 years. The first time I met Helen Dunbar, she nearly dropped the lasagna dish she was holding. Her husband, Tom, opened the door and said something simple. "Welcome home." Their son, Cody, spent the evening showing me photos of Helen when she was younger. "You've got her chin," he said. Helen brought out a small jewelry box from the kitchen drawer. Inside was a hospital wristband. Baby girl Dunbar. She had kept it for 25 years. "I lit a candle every birthday," she said softly, "just in case." For the next 3 months, I lived in two worlds. At home, Lorraine still played the role of the devoted adoptive mother. In Ridgemont, 2.5 hours away, Helen introduced me as her daughter. Both realities existed at the same time, but something else happened during those months. Lorraine started tightening control. First, it was the rent. A typed notice appeared on my table. Rent increasing to $850 next month. 30 days to accept or vacate. Then I realized the next step would be insurance, and after that, everything else. She was pushing me out, but she was doing it carefully, so she could still control the ending. 3 weeks before my birthday, Lorraine invited me to dinner. Maggie's place. "Just the three of us," she said sweetly, "but we have something important to discuss." I knew exactly what that meant. She was planning the reveal. The moment she would explain how I was no longer useful, and she expected me to accept it quietly, so I called Helen. "Can you come to the restaurant?" I asked. "Of course," she said immediately, "but sit separately." "Why?" "Because I need to hear what they say first." 4 days later, I walked into Maggie's place. The restaurant was full. The smell of cornbread and cedar filled the room. I scanned the tables. In the corner near the window, Helen sat with Tom and Cody. Helen saw me. She gave the smallest nod. That was enough. I sat down at the center table. Lorraine and Glenn arrived a few minutes later. Lorraine ordered wine. Glenn stared at the table. Then Lorraine folded her hands and delivered the speech she had prepared. "You're adopted," she said. "We took you in when you were 3 days old." She smiled. "The tax benefits made it work for us." The room went quiet, but Lorraine wasn't finished. "Now you're 25, she said. "The benefits are over." Then she slid a paper across the table. "You have 30 days to move out." I didn't cry, I didn't argue. Instead, I reached into my bag because inside was an envelope. And once I opened it, everything in that restaurant was about to change. Lorraine waited. She expected tears, or shock, maybe an apology. That had always been the pattern. Whenever she delivered one of her quiet ultimatums, the conversation ended with me accepting it. But this time, the silence stretched longer than she liked. I looked at the paper she had slid across the table. 30 days to vacate. Typed. Signed. Prepared. She had planned this moment carefully. Lorraine always did. "What do you mean 30 days?" I asked calmly. She leaned back in the booth, satisfied. "It means exactly what it says." Her voice carried just enough volume for nearby tables to hear. Lorraine believed an audience made her arguments stronger. "You're 25 now," she continued. "We've done our part." Glenn stared at the table. He had barely spoken since sitting down. I watched his hands. They were folded together like he was holding them still. "Your cousin Brittany needs the apartment," Lorraine said. "So it's time for you to move on." I nodded slowly. "Is that everything?" Lorraine blinked. She hadn't expected that response. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said quietly, "is that the entire conversation you planned?" For the first time, her smile faltered. Because Lorraine Mercer didn't like conversations she couldn't predict. She glanced toward Glenn. He shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. "Paige," Lorraine said carefully, "this doesn't have to be difficult. You're adopted. We helped you when no one else would." Her voice carried further now. 2 tables away, a couple stopped talking. Lorraine noticed. She straightened slightly. "I think you should appreciate that." I felt something settle inside my chest. Not anger, clarity. "Did you really just say that?" I asked. "Of course I did." Her patience was fading. "We took you in when no one else wanted you." The sentence landed heavily in the room. A fork clinked against a plate somewhere behind us. Glenn finally looked up. "Lorraine," he murmured, but she waved him off. "No," she said sharply. "She needs to hear this." Her eyes fixed on me again. "You should be grateful." Most people would be. I studied her face for a moment. 25 years of carefully controlled kindness. And beneath it, something colder. Transactional. Grateful for what? I asked. Lorraine frowned. For everything. The house, the food, the opportunity. She tapped the eviction notice with her finger. Most parents wouldn't tolerate this kind of attitude. I glanced down at the paper, then back at her. You planned this dinner, I said slowly, to tell me I'm disposable. Her expression hardened. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. Glenn shifted again. Maybe we should take this conversation somewhere private, he suggested. But Lorraine shook her head. No. Her voice rose slightly. She needs to understand reality. Reality, the word hung in the air. Okay, I said, if we're doing reality. I reached down and opened my bag. Lorraine watched carefully. What are you doing? Instead of answering, I pulled out the envelope. Plain white, slightly bent at one corner from being carried for months. I placed it on the table beside her eviction notice. Glenn leaned forward. What's that? I rested my hand on the envelope. Something important. Lorraine narrowed her eyes. If that's some kind of legal threat. It's not. Then what is it? I didn't answer immediately, because silence makes people uncomfortable, especially people who rely on control, and Lorraine Mercer needed control like oxygen. Finally, she snapped. Paige, answer me. What's in the envelope? I met her gaze. Proof. Her eyes flickered. Proof of what? I opened the envelope. First, I removed a photograph. 3 people standing in a backyard garden. A woman with short brown hair, a tall man beside her, and me standing between them, all 3 of us smiling, real smiles. I placed the photograph in front of Lorraine. What is this? She asked. I slid the second document out. The DNA report. 99.7% match. Relationship, parent. Glenn's face drained of color. Lorraine stared at the paper. Her lips parted slightly. This can't be real. It is. Then I removed the last item. Helen's handwritten letter. I didn't unfold it. I just placed it beside the photograph. And finally I spoke. My biological mother's name is Helen Dunbar. The name landed like a dropped plate. Lorraine froze. Glenn pushed his chair back slightly. She's a nurse in Ridgemont, I continued calmly. She's been looking for me for 25 years. Lorraine's mouth opened, closed. You're lying. I'm not. Glenn stared at the photograph again. You met them? Yes. When? 8 months ago. Lorraine's face changed. Not sadness, not regret, something closer to panic. You had no right, she said sharply. I almost laughed. No right. You're our daughter. You just told me I was. The table went quiet again, because that was the moment Lorraine realized something important. The story she had prepared for tonight wasn't working. She had planned a controlled ending, but I had arrived with a different one. I leaned back slightly. And there's something else you should know. Lorraine's eyes snapped up. What? I glanced across the restaurant, toward the window. 3 people sat quietly at a corner table. Helen, Tom, Cody. Helen was watching us, waiting. They're here, I said. Lorraine blinked. Who? My family. Glenn turned slowly. Lorraine's eyes followed his gaze. And across the restaurant, Helen Dunbar stood up. Tom rose beside her. Cody pushed back his chair. 3 people began walking across Maggie's place. Not quickly, not dramatically, just walking toward our table, toward me. Lorraine's voice came out in a whisper. What did you do? I looked at her calmly. I stopped being alone. Helen reached the table first. She didn't speak. She simply placed her hand gently on my shoulder, warm, steady, after 25 years. Lorraine stared at her. You have no right to be here, she said. Helen met her eyes quietly. I'm here because my daughter asked me to come. The word daughter echoed softly through the restaurant, and for the first time all night, Lorraine Mercer had no response. Because the story she had told this town for 25 years had just collided with something stronger. The truth. And everyone in Maggie's place was watching. Helen's hand stayed on my shoulder. She didn't grip tightly. She didn't make a scene. She simply stood beside me like someone who had every right to be there. And that quiet confidence changed the entire room. Lorraine noticed it immediately. Her eyes moved from Helen to Tom, then to Cody. 3 strangers standing beside the daughter she had just publicly discarded. "You planned this," Lorraine said. Her voice was lower now, controlled. But the sharp edge had returned. I shook my head. "No. I prepared for it." That difference mattered. Lorraine didn't understand it yet, but she would. Tom stepped forward slightly. He wasn't aggressive, just present. A steady kind of presence Glenn had never been. "We're not here for a fight," Tom said calmly. "We're here because Paige asked us to come." Glenn shifted in his seat. For a moment he looked like he might stand. But he didn't. Lorraine's attention stayed locked on Helen. "You're the one who gave her away," she said. The words were meant to cut. Helen didn't react the way Lorraine expected. She didn't defend herself. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she spoke quietly. "I was 22. Her eyes never left Lorraine's. And alone. The restaurant was silent now, completely silent. Even the kitchen noise had faded. Lorraine scoffed. "That's not an excuse." "No," Helen said calmly. "It's context." Tom's hand rested on the back of my chair, not claiming territory, just steadying the moment. Cody stood quietly beside him, watching everything. Lorraine looked around the room. She finally noticed what I had noticed minutes earlier. People were listening, not pretending not to, actually listening. Pastor Jim from the church sat 2 tables away. His fork rested halfway across his plate. Maggie stood behind the counter with her arms folded. Lorraine's audience had become something else. Witnesses. "This is ridiculous," Lorraine said. She stood abruptly. Her chair scraped loudly across the wooden floor. "You think you can embarrass me like this?" I looked at her calmly. "You embarrassed yourself." Her eyes flashed. "You ungrateful." She stopped because she had almost said the same word she had used earlier. Useless. And now she knew everyone had heard it. Glenn spoke quietly. "Lorraine, maybe we should go." "No," she snapped. Her voice cracked slightly. She wasn't ready to leave yet. Lorraine Mercer never left a room she believed she still controlled. She turned back to Helen. "You don't know anything about her," Lorraine said. "You weren't there." Helen nodded slowly. "You're right." "I was." She paused. "But I never stopped wanting to be." The sentence landed harder than anything else that night. Lorraine's mouth opened. Closed, for the first time she looked uncertain. I reached forward and slid the photograph toward her again. "That's us last month," I said. Lorraine stared at the picture. She saw it now, the smiles, the familiarity, the way we stood close together without thinking about it. "You've been seeing them behind our backs," she said. "Yes." "For how long?" 8 months. Glenn inhaled sharply. 8 months. That meant everything Lorraine believed she controlled had already changed months ago. Lorraine looked back up at me. "You betrayed us." The word sounded strange coming from her. "You raised me for tax credits," I said quietly. "You don't get to use the word betrayal." Glenn's shoulders dropped slightly, like something inside him had finally given up trying to hold the moment together. Lorraine turned toward him. "Say something," she demanded. Glenn looked at me, then at Helen, then back at Lorraine. "I think we should leave." That was it, not an argument, not a defense, just a quiet surrender. Lorraine stared at him. "You're taking her side now." "I'm saying this is over." Lorraine's eyes widened. She had spent 30 years controlling Glenn, and now, in the middle of a restaurant, he had stepped away from her script. Lorraine grabbed her purse. "This isn't finished," she said. Her voice carried again. But it didn't have the same strength, because the room had already heard everything. And once people hear the truth clearly, the story changes. She turned toward the exit. Her heels struck the wooden floor sharply with each step. Glenn hesitated beside the table. He looked at me for a long moment, like he wanted to say something, an apology, an explanation, something, but nothing came out. Instead, he nodded once, small, almost invisible. Then he followed Lorraine toward the door. The bell above the entrance jingled softly when it closed behind them. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then the room slowly breathed again. Conversation returned, quietly at first, then normal again. Helen finally sat down in the empty chair across from me. Her hand was still resting on my shoulder. Tom took the seat beside her. Cody dragged a chair from another table and joined us. Maggie appeared with an extra place setting. "This one's on the house tonight," she said simply. Then she walked away before anyone could respond. I looked around the table. 3 people who had driven 2.5 hours to sit in a restaurant and wait for my signal. 3 people who had shown up without asking anything in return. Helen squeezed my hand gently. "Are you okay?" she asked. I nodded. "I think so." Cody leaned forward. "So, do we still get dinner?" I laughed, the first real laugh I'd had all night. "Yes," I said. "I think we do." The waitress returned. Menus appeared. Orders were placed. Conversation slowly replaced the tension. Nothing dramatic, just normal voices. Normal questions. The kind of conversation families have at dinner. And sitting there at that table, I realized something strange. For 25 years, I had believed family meant obligation, control, debt. But looking around that table now, family looked different. It looked like people who chose to stay. Across the room, someone clapped softly, then stopped when they realized they had done it out loud. I glanced over. Pastor Jim nodded quietly, not approving, not judging, just acknowledging what had happened. The truth had been spoken, and the story Lorraine had spent 25 years telling this town had just ended. I picked up Helen's letter again, the one she had written years ago, and for the first time in my life. I wasn't sitting at a table performing gratitude. I was simply sitting with people who wanted me there. Lorraine didn't come back. Neither did Glenn. The bell above the door had barely stopped ringing when the restaurant slowly returned to normal. Forks moved again. Conversations restarted. But the room wasn't quite the same, because everyone in Maggie's place had just heard something they wouldn't forget. Small towns remember moments like that. Dinner arrived 10 minutes later. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, cornbread. Tom insisted we order whatever we wanted. "Tonight feels like a celebration," he said. Helen smiled softly. "Or a beginning." I wasn't sure which one it was yet, but sitting there between them felt strangely calm, like something heavy had finally been set down. After dinner, we walked outside. The air smelled like wet pavement and cedar from the nearby lumber yard. Helen leaned against the hood of Tom's truck. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," she said. "Decide what?" "Where you want to go next." Tom nodded toward the highway. "You could move to Ridgemont if you wanted." "No pressure," Cody added quickly, "but there's a spare room." I thought about the garage apartment behind Lorraine's house. The thin walls, the quiet rules, the feeling of always being tolerated instead of welcomed. Then I thought about Helen's kitchen, the way she had laughed when Cody told a stupid joke, the way Tom had asked me 3 times if I needed more food. 2 different worlds, one built on obligation, the other on choice. "I think," I said slowly, "I'd like to visit first." Helen's eyes softened. "That's more than enough." The visit turned into 2 weeks. Ridgemont was larger than my hometown, still small by most standards, but large enough that people didn't automatically know your entire history. Helen showed me the hospital where she worked. Tom introduced me to the hardware store he managed. Cody dragged me through half the town showing off his favorite burger place, the Lake Trail, and a used bookstore he swore had the best coffee in the county. They didn't treat me like someone fragile. They treated me like someone who had simply been missing. Back home, Lorraine tried to repair the damage. The following Sunday, she appeared at church in her usual front row seat. perfect hair, perfect dress, perfect smile. She told people there had been a misunderstanding at the restaurant, but the story didn't hold, because 12 people had been there, and small towns share stories faster than they share gossip. Pastor Jim listened quietly. Then he asked one question. "Did you say those things to Paige?" Lorraine didn't answer. That silence traveled through the town faster than anything she could have said. The garage apartment sat empty for weeks. Lorraine eventually rented it to Brittany like she had planned. But something about the situation felt different now. The control she once had over my life was gone, and without that control, Lorraine Mercer looked smaller, not cruel, not powerful, just smaller. Meanwhile, my life began moving forward in small ways. I applied for jobs in Ridgemont, real applications, without fear someone would interfere. 2 weeks later, Tom mentioned an opening at the accounting office across from the courthouse. "Entry-level assistant," he said. "You're good with numbers, right?" I smiled. I've been balancing Lorraine's household budgets since I was 16. That sounds like experience to me. The interview lasted 20 minutes. No suspicious phone calls, no secret warnings, just questions about my skills and availability. The manager shook my hand. "You start Monday." It felt almost unreal. 3 years of waiting, and the opportunity appeared quietly in one afternoon. I moved to Ridgemont 3 weeks later. Helen helped pack my things. There weren't many, 2 boxes of clothes, a suitcase, a shoebox of photos. Tom borrowed a truck from work. Cody drove the whole way talking about a movie he had seen 3 times already. When we reached their house, Helen handed me a small key. "The spare bedroom is yours for as long as you need it." No rent, no conditions, just a key. The accounting office was quiet. 5 desks, stacks of paperwork, a view of the courthouse steps through the front window. The work was simple at first, organizing files, entering numbers, preparing invoices. But something about the routine felt solid, predictable, earned. The manager, Mr. Halpern, noticed quickly that I paid attention to details. "You're careful," he said one afternoon. "That's rare." 3 months later, he offered me a raise. Back in my old town, Lorraine eventually stopped explaining the restaurant incident. People already knew enough. Some avoided the topic entirely. Others simply treated her politely but distantly. Reputation in a small town doesn't collapse loudly. It fades, slowly, quietly, until one day people simply stop asking your opinion. I drove past my old house once, not intentionally, just passing through on the highway. The garage apartment lights were on. Brittany's car sat in the driveway. For a moment, I considered stopping, but the feeling passed quickly. That chapter of my life had already ended. The door that once held me there had closed, and for the first time, I wasn't standing outside it anymore. That night, I sat on Helen's porch watching the sunset fade across the trees. Tom grilled burgers in the backyard. Cody argued with the dog about who owned the tennis ball. Helen handed me a glass of iced tea. "You look peaceful," she said. "I think I am." She nodded. Then she said something simple. "You deserved better." The sentence settled quietly between us, because sometimes justice doesn't arrive as revenge. Sometimes it arrives as a life you finally get to choose. 6 months passed quietly. Life in Ridgemont settled into something steady. Work, dinner at the house, evenings on the porch. Nothing dramatic, just days that moved forward without someone else deciding how they should end. That alone felt new. The accounting office trusted me more each month. Mr. Halpern began leaving more complicated files on my desk: tax forms, payroll adjustments, quarterly reports for small businesses around town. "Check the numbers twice," he told me the first time. I always did. Careful work had been a survival skill for years. Now it was simply part of the job. 3 months later, he handed me a different kind of envelope. Inside was a promotion letter, assistant accountant, a modest salary increase, health insurance, paid vacation. I stared at the paper longer than necessary, not because the raise was large, because it was earned. Not assigned, not controlled, earned. Helen watched the change happen slowly. She never asked about the past unless I brought it up. Most evenings we talked about ordinary things instead. Work stories, recipes. Cody's latest plan to rebuild an old motorcycle he found online. Tom's endless arguments about baseball statistics, normal conversations, the kind I had once believed only happened in other families. One Sunday afternoon, Helen handed me a small box. "What's this?" I asked. "Something I've been holding on to." Inside was the hospital bracelet she had shown me the first night we met. Baby girl Dunbar. The plastic was worn, the ink slightly faded. "I kept it in case you ever found me," she said softly. I turned it over carefully. 25 years of waiting sat inside that thin strip of plastic. "You can keep it now," she said. For the first time, I understood something clearly. Helen had never tried to replace the past. She had simply waited for the chance to be part of the future. Meanwhile, the story from Maggie's place continued circulating in my old town. Not loudly, but steadily. People remembered Lorraine's words, and people remember cruelty more clearly than kindness. The church committee quietly replaced her with someone else. Neighbors stopped asking her to organize events. Her reputation didn't collapse. It faded. Small towns are good at that. They let silence do the work. Glenn appeared once, 2 months after the restaurant. He stood outside the accounting office late one afternoon, hands in his jacket pockets, looking uncertain. When I stepped outside, he nodded once. "Paige." Glenn. For years, I had called him Dad, but the word didn't feel accurate anymore. He seemed to understand that. "I heard you're doing well," he said. "I am." He looked relieved, then uncomfortable again. "I should have said something that night," he admitted quietly. "At the restaurant." "You didn't." "No." The silence stretched between us. Finally, he nodded again. "You deserved better." The words sounded almost identical to Helen S., but they carried a different weight, because Glenn hadn't said them when it mattered most. Still, I appreciated the honesty. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You too." He walked away without looking back, and that was enough. Spring arrived in Ridgemont with warm evenings and long sunsets. Tom built a small garden behind the house. Helen planted tomatoes. Cody claimed he was growing peppers but mostly forgot to water them. One evening, I joined them outside. The air smelled like soil and cut grass. Tom handed me a set of garden gloves. "You're part of this now," he said. It wasn't dramatic, just a simple statement, but it carried more meaning than any speech Lorraine had ever given about family. Sometimes people ask if I regret confronting Lorraine publicly. The answer is simple: no. Because the dinner at Maggie's place didn't destroy my life. It revealed it. For years, I believed I owed Lorraine gratitude for something she had treated like a transaction. That belief kept me quiet, kept me small. The moment she spoke the truth out loud, the illusion disappeared. And without that illusion, everything became clearer. A year after the restaurant dinner, Maggie sent me a message. "You should stop by sometime," she wrote, so I did. The place looked exactly the same. Same wooden booths, same smell of cornbread. When Maggie saw me, she smiled. "Different night this time," she said. I nodded. "Very different." We talked for a few minutes. Nothing about Lorraine, nothing about the past, just normal conversation. And when I left the restaurant, no one stared. No one whispered. To them, I was simply another person finishing dinner. That normalcy felt like the final piece falling into place. That night, I drove back to Ridgemont. The highway stretched quietly through the trees. When I pulled into the driveway, Helen's porch light was on. Tom waved from the grill. Cody was sitting on the steps with the dog, waiting, not expecting anything, just waiting. I stepped out of the car and realized something simple. For 25 years, I had believed family meant proving you deserved to stay. Now I understood something different. Family means you don't have to prove anything at all. You simply arrive, and the door is already open.